Chincha Islands, off the coast of Peru, 1862. A British sea captain anchors offshore and writes in his log that he can smell the islands from 8 miles out before he can even see them. What he's smelling is bird droppings, but not a thin layer of it. The Chincha Islands are covered in guano deposits up to 200 feet deep, built up over thousands of years by millions of seabirds, in a climate so dry that the droppings never wash away. They just keep accumulating, century after century, into literal cliffs of bird excrement. Here's the part that should stop you cold. By the time that captain is writing in his log, this smell, this substance, is the single most valuable export commodity in South America. Peru is funding roughly 60% of its entire national government budget from selling bird droppings to European and American farmers. Countries are about to go to war over islands that are, quite literally, made of guano. So here's the question that's going to carry us through this whole story. How does bird poop become so valuable that it pays off national debts, triggers a war between 3 countries, and gets guarded by indentured laborers under conditions historians compare to slavery, and then, within a few decades, becomes a worthless historical footnote that most people today have never even heard of? Let's go back to where this starts, because the underlying problem is older than guano itself: soil exhaustion. By the early 1800s, European and American farmland that had been cultivated intensively for generations was running out of nitrogen, the nutrient plants need most to grow. Crop yields were declining across entire regions. Farmers desperately needed a way to put nitrogen back into depleted soil, and nobody had found one that worked at scale. Enter the Peruvian guano deposits, and the man who made Europe pay attention to them: the German naturalist Alexander von Humboldt, who, during his South American expedition around 1802, takes samples of Peruvian guano back to Europe and has it chemically analyzed. The results are staggering. Guano from these specific islands, built up in a rainless desert climate that preserves the nitrogen instead of letting it wash away, turns out to contain somewhere around 30 times the nitrogen content of ordinary manure. It is, quite simply, the most powerful natural fertilizer European chemists have ever measured. For a couple of decades, this stays a curiosity in scientific journals. Then, in the 1840s, German chemist Justus von Liebig publishes influential work on agricultural chemistry that essentially tells European farmers exactly what they want to hear. Nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium are the keys to soil fertility, and guano happens to be loaded with exactly the right one. What follows is one of the strangest commodity booms in economic history, because unlike almost everything else in stories like this, spices, sugar, rubber, guano isn't something you can grow more of. It's a finite geological deposit, built up over thousands of years of seabird life, and once you ship it away, it doesn't come back in any human time frame. Peru, which controls the Chincha Islands and several other major guano deposits along its coast, realizes almost immediately what it's sitting on. The Peruvian government nationalizes the guano trade and turns it into a state monopoly, auctioning extraction and export contracts to merchant houses, mostly British, who handle the actual shipping to European and American markets. If you're finding this useful, there's more of this kind of hidden economics history coming, so if that's your thing, subscribe, because what happens next involves a labor system almost nobody talks about, and a war that's fought, with real armies and real casualties, essentially over the right to sell fertilizer. The first act belongs to the boom years, roughly the 1840s through the 1870s, and the sheer scale of money involved is hard to overstate. At its peak, guano exports account for somewhere around 60% of total Peruvian government revenue. The country essentially runs its national budget on bird droppings for 3 decades. Peru uses guano revenue to pay off foreign debts, fund railway construction, and finance the lifestyle of a new elite class in Lima, sometimes nicknamed, with a mix of admiration and mockery, the Guano aristocracy. But somebody has to actually dig the stuff out of 200-foot deep deposits under a blazing equatorial sun, breathing ammonia fumes so concentrated that workers reportedly had to cover their faces just to survive a shift. Peru's solution is a labor system built substantially on indentured workers brought from China, under contracts historians widely describe as a disguised form of slavery. Workers recruited or kidnapped from Chinese ports, transported under conditions with mortality rates during the voyage alone sometimes compared to the historical Atlantic slave trade, then worked on the islands under brutal quotas, with documented cases of suicide among laborers driven to despair by the conditions. By some estimates, somewhere around 100,000 Chinese laborers were brought to Peru under this system during the Guano era, and the death toll among them, both during transport and on the islands themselves, was severe enough that the trade earned its own grim nickname among critics at the time, the pig trade, a term used because the laborers were transported and treated, in the words of contemporary observers, more like cargo than people. The second act is the war, and it's almost absurd how directly it traces back to bird droppings. By the 1860s and 1870s, the best, easiest to reach guano deposits are running out, and a related but distinct resource becomes the next prize. Sodium nitrate, also called Chilean saltpeter, mined from the Atacama Desert, another powerful nitrogen source. This one not from birds, but from ancient mineral deposits found in territory disputed between Bolivia, Peru, and Chile. In 1879, a dispute over taxation of nitrate mining companies operating in Bolivian territory triggers the War of the Pacific, pulling in Chile against Bolivia and Peru together. The war lasts until 1883, and Chile wins decisively, annexing the entire nitrate-rich coastal region from Bolivia, which loses its only Pacific coastline permanently, and seizing Peru's most valuable nitrate and remaining guano territories as well. Chile, almost overnight, goes from a relatively minor South American economy to the dominant global supplier of nitrate fertilizer, and spends the next several decades building substantial portions of its national wealth and infrastructure on what's essentially the same resource category that bankrupted and then humiliated its neighbors. Now back to the German chemist with the soil samples. The entire guano and nitrate boom exists because of one specific bottleneck. Nitrogen that plants can actually use is hard to get out of thin air, even though the atmosphere is roughly 78% nitrogen gas. Nitrogen gas itself is essentially useless to plants directly. It needs to be converted, or fixed, into a usable chemical form first, and until the early 20th century, mined guano and nitrate deposits were among the only large-scale sources of fixed nitrogen humanity had access to. That bottleneck breaks in 1909 when German chemists Fritz Haber and Karl Bosch develop an industrial process, now called the Haber-Bosch process, that synthesizes ammonia directly from atmospheric nitrogen and hydrogen, using high pressure and a metal catalyst. For the first time in human history, nitrogen fertilizer can be manufactured in a factory, from air itself, with no birds, no islands, and no geological deposits required. The effect on the guano and nitrate trade is immediate and permanent. Within a couple of decades, synthetic ammonia-based fertilizer overtakes natural deposits as the dominant global nitrogen source, and the Guano Islands that once funded entire national governments become, more or less, an obscure historical curiosity. Bird colonies on rocky outcrops that nobody fights wars over anymore. So where does all of this leave us today? In a few places, and some of them are bigger than you'd expect. First, in your food supply, almost entirely invisibly. The Haber-Bosch process that ended the guano boom is now estimated by agricultural historians and chemists to be responsible, directly or indirectly, for sustaining a substantial share of the world's current population, because synthetic nitrogen fertilizer made the high-yield farming that feeds billions of people possible in the first place. The bird-dropping economy didn't just collapse, it got replaced by a chemistry breakthrough so consequential that some historians rank it among the most important inventions of the 20th century, full stop. Second, in national borders that are still drawn the way the War of the Pacific left them. Bolivia remains landlocked to this day, having never regained Pacific coastline access lost in that war, and the dispute over that lost territory remains a live diplomatic and emotional issue in Bolivian politics generations later. A border dispute whose root cause was, at bottom, the right to mine fertilizer. Third, in labor history that rarely gets told alongside the more famous stories of forced labor in this era. The Chinese indentured laborers who died on the Guano Islands and during the transport to reach them represent one of the deadliest and least remembered labor migrations of the 19th century, overshadowed in popular memory by the Atlantic slave trade and by Chinese railroad labor in the United States, even though the Guano Islands' mortality conditions were, by many contemporary accounts, just as severe. And fourth, in the Chincha Islands themselves, which are still there off the Peruvian coast, still covered in seabird colonies, now protected as a nature reserve instead of mined down to bare rock. A strange, quiet ending for a place that once helped fund a national government and indirectly triggered a war. So, let's go back to where we started. A British captain, smelling a fortune from 8 miles out at sea, on islands that would soon pay off Peru's national debt, get fought over by 3 countries, and be worked by laborers shipped across the Pacific under conditions historians still struggle to fully document. All of it traced back to one simple, almost embarrassing fact. Plants need nitrogen, and for about 70 years, the easiest place on Earth to get a lot of it happened to be a pile of bird droppings off the coast of Peru. Next time you walk past a bag of fertilizer at a garden store, remember what's underneath that small, boring purchase. A war, a labor system that killed tens of thousands of people, and islands that, for one strange chapter of history, smelled like money from 8 miles out. If you liked this one, subscribe. There's more where this came from. Photorealistic 19th century British sailing ship anchored offshore near towering white cliffs, overcast hazy light, documentary historical style. R16-9. Photorealistic British sea captain, standing on deck, writing in a leather logbook. Dim lantern light, documentary historical style. AR16-9. Photorealistic close-up of an old logbook page with handwritten ink notes. Candlelight, documentary archival style. AR16-9. Photorealistic massive white guano cliffs rising from the ocean. Seabirds circling overhead. Hazy daylight, documentary nature style. AR16-9. Photorealistic close-up of layered white guano deposits forming cliff-like strata. Harsh midday light, documentary texture shot. R16-9. Photorealistic dense flock of seabirds covering a rocky island cliffside. Bright coastal daylight, documentary nature style. R16. 9. Photorealistic dry desert coastal landscape with no vegetation, rocky islands offshore, harsh sunlight, documentary nature style. AR16-9. Photorealistic close-up of an old South American government treasury ledger open on a wooden desk. Candlelight, documentary archival style. R16-9. Photorealistic 19th century Lima government building exterior. Formal colonial architecture. Bright midday light, documentary historical style. Are 16 to 9. Photorealistic stacks of gold and silver coins beside an open ledger book. Dramatic side lighting, documentary still life. Are 16 to 9. Photorealistic 3 small sailing warships anchored near a rocky coastline. Tense overcast sky, documentary historical style. Are 16 to 9. Photorealistic dramatic depiction of distant ships preparing for naval conflict. Stormy sky, documentary historical style. Are 16 to 9. Photorealistic worn 19th century European farmland with dry, cracked soil. Overcast light, documentary nature style. AR 16 to 9. 9. Photorealistic close-up of a farmer's hand holding a handful of depleted dry soil. Soft, natural light. Documentary macro style. AR 16 to 9. Photorealistic struggling wheat field with sparse, weak crop growth. Overcast grim light. Documentary nature style. R 16 to 9. Photorealistic 19th century European farmer standing in a thin, disappointing harvest field. Somber daylight. Documentary historical style. Are 16 to 9. Photorealistic portrait-style painting of a 19th century German naturalist explorer in period attire. Museum lighting. Documentary historical style. Are 16 to 9. Photorealistic explorer's expedition camp at the edge of a South American coastline. Period tents and equipment. Golden hour light. Documentary historical style. AR 16 to 9. Photorealistic close-up of a small wooden specimen box filled with samples. Soft, natural light. Documentary still life. AR 16 : 9. Photorealistic 19th century European chemistry laboratory interior. Glass vials and brass instruments. Dim lab lighting. Documentary historical style. Are 16 to 9. Photorealistic close-up of a scientist's hands analyzing a sample under a brass microscope. Warm lamplight. Documentary historical style. Are 16 to 9. Photorealistic close-up of handwritten chemical analysis notes on aged paper. Candlelight. Documentary archival style. Are 16 to 9. Photorealistic close-up comparing a small pile of pale guano powder beside ordinary dark manure. Soft natural light. Documentary still life. Are 16 to 9. Photorealistic old scientific journal pages with handwritten diagrams. Dim library lighting. Documentary archival style. Are 16 to 9. Photorealistic portrait-style painting of a 19th century German agricultural chemist at his writing desk. Museum lighting. Documentary historical style. AR 16 to 9. Photorealistic portrait. 9. Photorealistic stack of old scientific publications and pamphlets on a wooden desk. Soft window light. Documentary still life. Are 16 to 9. Photorealistic European farmer reading a printed agricultural pamphlet in a barn. Soft daylight. Documentary historical style. Are 16 to 9. Photorealistic wide aerial view of a barren desert coastline meeting the Pacific Ocean. Harsh bright light. Documentary nature style. AR 16 to 9. Photorealistic close-up of dense layered guano deposits exposed on a cliff face. Harsh sunlight. Documentary texture shot. R 16 to 9. Photorealistic 19th century Peruvian government official signing an official export contract document. Dim office lighting. Documentary historical style. AR 16 to 9. Photorealistic British merchant trading house office interior. Ledgers and maps on the walls. Dim lamplight. documentary historical style, AR-16, 9. Photorealistic 19th century cargo ship, loading dock with sacks being lowered by crane, overcast humid light, documentary historical style, AR-16 to 9. Photorealistic close-up of weathered burlap sacks stacked on a busy dock, natural daylight, documentary texture shot. R-16 to 9. Photorealistic, busy 19th century South American port with multiple ships docked, overcast light, documentary historical style. R-16 to 9. Photorealistic close-up of a hand stamping an official wax seal onto an export document, candlelight, documentary still life. R-16 to 9. Photorealistic opulent 19th century Lima mansion exterior, ornate colonial architecture, bright midday light, documentary historical style. R-16 to 9. Photorealistic wealthy Peruvian elite family in fine period clothing standing before a grand estate, golden hour light, documentary historical style, AR-16 to 9. Photorealistic. 9. Photorealistic interior of a lavish 19th century Lima drawing room, fine furniture and chandeliers, warm candlelight, documentary historical style, AR-16 to 9. Photorealistic 19th century railway construction site with workers laying tracks, dusty daylight, documentary historical style. R-16 to 9. Photorealistic close-up of a steam locomotive under construction in a workshop, dim industrial lighting, documentary historical style. R-16 to 9. Photorealistic close-up of an official government bond document with ornate printed border, candlelight, documentary archival style. R-16 to 9. Photorealistic vast open-pit guano excavation site, workers with shovels under a blazing sun, harsh light, documentary historical style, AR-16 to 9. Photorealistic close-up of a laborer's face, wrapped in cloth to filter dust and fumes, harsh sunlight, documentary historical style, AR-16, 9. Photorealistic group of laborers digging into a towering guano deposit with hand tools, harsh midday light, documentary historical style, AR-16 to 9. Photorealistic narrow wooden chute used to load guano onto waiting ships below a cliff, bright coastal light, documentary historical style. R-16 to 9. Photorealistic 19th century Chinese coastal port with people boarding a crowded sailing vessel, overcast somber light, documentary historical style. R-16 to 9. Photorealistic cramped ship's hold packed with rows of indentured laborers, dim claustrophobic lighting, documentary historical style. R-16 to 9. Photorealistic close-up of a worn labor contract document with Chinese and Spanish text, candlelight, documentary. Archival style, AR-16 to 9. Photorealistic exhausted laborers resting briefly beside guano. Excavation tools, harsh midday light, documentary historical style, AR-16, 9. Photorealistic somber barracks. Interior on a remote guano island, rows of simple cots, dim grim lighting, documentary historical style, AR-16 to 9. Photorealistic isolated rocky island with small worker barracks and excavation pits, harsh bright light, documentary historical style. R-16 to 9. Photorealistic close-up of a worn shovel and pickaxe resting against a guano cliff wall, harsh sunlight, documentary still life. R-16 to 9. Photorealistic distant view of laborers loading filled sacks onto small boats near the island shore. Bright coastal light. Documentary historical style AR-16-9. Photorealistic vast Atacama desert landscape with mineral-rich reddish terrain. Harsh dry sunlight. Documentary nature style AR-16-9. Photorealistic close-up of raw sodium nitrate crystals on dry desert ground. Harsh midday light. Documentary texture shot AR-16-9. Photorealistic 19th century desert mining camp with simple wooden structures. Dusty, harsh light. Documentary historical style AR-16:9. Photorealistic close-up of an old territorial map showing disputed borders between Bolivia, Peru, and Chile. Candlelight, documentary archival style AR-16-9. Photorealistic 19th century Chilean naval warship sailing along a desert coastline. Dramatic stormy sky. Documentary historical style AR-16-9. Photorealistic line of soldiers marching through arid desert terrain. Harsh dusty light. Documentary historical style AR-16-9. Photorealistic dramatic battlefield scene with smoke rising over a desert landscape. Intense lighting. Documentary historical style R-16-9. Photorealistic exhausted soldiers resting near a desert encampment after battle. Somber, overcast light. Documentary historical style R-16-9. Photorealistic formal 19th century treaty signing ceremony in a government hall. Candlelight. Documentary historical style R-16-9. Photorealistic close-up of an official peace treaty document with wax seals. Dim archival lighting. Documentary still life R-16-9. Photorealistic landlocked mountainous Bolivian terrain with no access to coastline. Distant peaks. Documentary nature style AR-16-9. Photorealistic bustling late 19th century Chilean port city with new infrastructure being built. Bright daylight. Documentary historical style AR-16-9. Photorealistic wide shot of a growing Chilean nitrate mining town in the desert. Dusty daylight. Documentary historical style AR-16-9. Photorealistic close-up of nitrate ore being loaded into rail carts. Harsh desert light. Documentary texture shot R-16-9. Photorealistic German chemistry laboratory. Interior with early industrial equipment. Dim clinical lighting. Documentary historical style AR-16-9. Photorealistic close-up of two scientists examining a pressurized metal apparatus. Clinical lab lighting. Documentary historical style AR-16-9. Photorealistic portrait style painting of two German chemists in early 20th century lab coats. Museum lighting. Documentary historical style R-16-9. Photorealistic close-up of a high-pressure industrial reaction vessel with gauges and valves. Dim industrial lighting. Documentary historical style AR-16-9. Photorealistic wide shot of an early 20th century ammonia synthesis. Factory exterior. Tall metal towers. Overcast daylight. Documentary historical style AR-16-9. Photorealistic close-up of clear liquid ammonia being collected in a glass container. Clinical lighting. Documentary still life R-16-9. Photorealistic abandoned guano excavation site with empty pits and crumbling structures. Overcast somber light. Documentary historical style R-16-9. Photorealistic quiet rocky island with seabirds returning to an undisturbed cliffside, soft, natural light, documentary nature style, AR 16:9. Photorealistic modern industrial fertilizer factory, exterior with large storage silos, bright daylight, contemporary photography style, AR 16:9. Photorealistic close-up of granular synthetic fertilizer pellets in a metal scoop, bright natural light, documentary still life, R 16:9. Photorealistic vast modern wheat field under cultivation, golden hour light, contemporary agricultural photography style, R 16:9. Photorealistic wide aerial view of modern high-yield farmland stretching to the horizon, soft morning light, contemporary photography style, R 16:9. Photorealistic close-up of a farmer's hand spreading synthetic fertilizer granules onto soil, natural daylight, documentary still life, R 16:9. Photorealistic busy modern grocery store, produce aisle filled with fresh vegetables, bright lighting, contemporary photography style, AR 16:9. Photorealistic modern landlocked Bolivian city street with mountains in the background, daylight, contemporary photography style, AR 16:9. Photorealistic distant view of the Chilean Pacific coastline near the former disputed border region, bright daylight, contemporary nature style, AR 16:9. Photorealistic modern Bolivian government building exterior, formal architecture, overcast daylight, contemporary photography style, R 16:9. Photorealistic close-up of an old historical map highlighting Bolivia's lost coastal territory, dim archival lighting, documentary still life, R 16:9. Photorealistic quiet, modern museum exhibit displaying indentured labor contracts and artifacts, soft gallery lighting, documentary style, R 16:9. Photorealistic historian examining old immigration records in an archive room, soft desk lamplight, documentary style, R 16:9. Photorealistic weathered unmarked graves on a remote rocky island, somber overcast light, documentary still life, R 16:9. Photorealistic close-up of an old ship manifest listing laborer names and origins, candlelight, documentary archival style, R 16:9. Photorealistic distant view of the Chincha Islands today, seabird colonies covering protected rocky cliffs, bright coastal light, documentary nature style, AR 16:9. Photorealistic close-up of a conservation sign on a protected nature reserve island, natural daylight, documentary still life, R 16:9. Photorealistic seabirds nesting peacefully on undisturbed cliffside rocks, soft morning light, documentary nature style, AR 16:9. Photorealistic wide shot of calm ocean waves lapping against a quiet protected island shoreline, golden hour light, documentary nature style, AR 16:9. Photorealistic distant silhouette of a 19th century sailing ship approaching a coastline at dawn, documentary historical style, AR 16:9. Photorealistic close-up of an old logbook page describing a smell detected far out at sea, candlelight, documentary archival style, AR 16:9. Photorealistic distant view of Peru's National Treasury building exterior, formal colonial architecture, bright daylight, documentary historical style, R 16:9. Photorealistic close-up of stacked foreign debt repayment documents on a wooden desk. Dim office lighting. Documentary archival style. AR 16:9. Photorealistic wide shot of soldiers from 3 different armies facing off across a desert landscape. Dramatic lighting. Documentary historical style. R16:9. Photorealistic close-up of indentured laborers' worn hands holding a small personal token from home. Soft natural light. Documentary macro style. R16:9. Photorealistic quiet shipboard scene of laborers staring out at the open ocean during a long voyage. Somber lighting. Documentary historical style. AR 16:9. Photorealistic close-up of a single guano-stained feather resting on bare rock. Soft natural light. Documentary nature. Macro style. AR 16:9. Photorealistic modern garden store shelf stocked with bags of fertilizer. Bright retail lighting. Contemporary photography style. R16:9. Photorealistic close-up of a hand picking up a bag of fertilizer from a store shelf. Natural daylight. Contemporary still life. R16:9. Photorealistic quiet, suburban backyard garden with neat rows of vegetables. Soft afternoon light. Contemporary photography style. AR 16:9. Photorealistic close-up of a small fertilizer bag. Label listing nitrogen content. Soft natural light. Documentary still life. R16:9. Photorealistic distant aerial view of South America's western coastline stretching along the Pacific. Hazy light. Documentary nature style. AR 16:9. Photorealistic close-up of an old engraved illustration depicting guano mining operations. Dim archival lighting. Documentary still life. AR 16:9. Photorealistic, quiet, rocky coastal cliffs at dusk. Waves crashing softly below. Documentary nature style. AR 16:9. Photorealistic close-up of a weathered ledger page showing declining guano export figures over time. Candlelight. Documentary archival style. R16:9. Photorealistic distant view of an abandoned 19th century guano company office building. Overcast somber light. Documentary historical style. R16:9. Photorealistic close-up of dust particles suspended in a beam of light inside an old colonial archive room. Documentary still life. R16:9. Photorealistic wide shot of a modern container ship navigating the Pacific coastline. Bright daylight. Contemporary photography style. AR 16:9. Photorealistic close-up of a young Bolivian student studying an old map of lost coastal territory in a classroom. Soft daylight. Documentary style. AR 16:9. Photorealistic quiet desert sunset over the Atacama nitrate fields. Dramatic orange sky. Documentary nature style. AR 16:9. Photorealistic close-up of a single dried guano fragment held up to the light. Soft natural light. Documentary macro style. R16:9. Photorealistic final wide shot of the Chincha Islands at golden hour. Seabirds circling peacefully over quiet cliffs. Documentary nature style. R16:9. Photorealistic close-up of a merchant house clerk tallying guano export revenue in a thick ledger. Warm desk lamp light. Documentary archival style. R16:9. Photorealistic wide shot of a remote guano island with multiple ships anchored offshore, waiting to load cargo. Hazy bright light. Documentary historical style. AR-16-9, photorealistic close-up of an old engraved newspaper illustration depicting the War of the Pacific, dim archival lighting, documentary still life. R-16-9, photorealistic quiet, present-day fishing village along the Peruvian coast near the historic Guano Islands, soft morning light, contemporary photography style. R-16-9.